They once seemed inseparable, a perfect balance of charm and chaos that conquered every stage they stepped on. Dean Martin, with his velvet voice and calm presence, and Jerry Lewis, with his wild energy and manic humor, created a partnership that shook Hollywood. But behind the laughter was a storm neither man could control. When it all fell apart, bitterness replaced friendship, and silence stretched on for decades. Only years later did Jerry Lewis finally reveal the painful truth about what tore them apart and what it cost him. The unlikely beginning. The story began in 1944, inside New York City's Glass Hat Club. Dean Martin was 27, a struggling crooner trying to make his way in smoky nightclubs. Jerry Lewis, just 18, was a wide-eyed comic performing a lip-sync act that few took seriously. When Jerry first saw Dean sing, he was struck by the man's charisma. Summoning his courage, he approached him after the show. Dean, amused, smirked and replied to Jerry's nervous introduction with a teasing, "What's it to you, kid?" That first exchange turned into a 3-hour conversation, a bond sealed over donuts and laughter. Within months, they began sneaking into empty clubs late at night, experimenting with routines. Dean would sing straight, while Jerry would disrupt with pratfalls, exaggerated faces, or ridiculous props. Their chemistry was immediate. At Atlantic City's 500 Club in 1946, when a singer suddenly dropped out, Jerry convinced owner Skinny D'Amato to let Dean join him. With barely 20 minutes to prepare, the duo stepped on stage before a restless crowd. For 47 minutes, they improvised chaos. Dean's crooning interrupted by Jerry's antics, Jerry tripping over imaginary wires, Dean trying to keep a straight face. By the end, the audience roared with 7 standing ovations. The success was explosive. Jerry's $110 a week salary instantly jumped to $750 as Skinny signed them on. Within weeks, the 500 Club became the hottest ticket in town. Their act traveled fast, to Havana, Madrid in New York, the Copacabana, the Chez Paree in Chicago. By 1947, Hollywood was already taking notice. They had found something no one else had. The perfect fusion of smooth music and slapstick insanity. Yet, beneath the glory of this rising act, their differences in temperament were already visible. Jerry was obsessive, a perfectionist, while Dean remained laid back, almost careless. What was their strength on stage would, in time, be the seed of destruction. From nightclubs to Hollywood. After conquering the nightclub circuit, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis became impossible to ignore. In 1947, they made waves at Slapsy Maxie's in Hollywood, where Paramount producers happened to be in the audience. That night would change everything. Within 2 years, they signed a 7-year contract worth $1.5 million with the studio, an unprecedented deal for comedians at the time. Their first film, My Friend Irma, cast them in supporting roles, but audiences couldn't look away. Paramount quickly rushed a sequel, My Friend Irma Goes West, before the first film even left theaters. From there, Martin and Lewis became a cultural phenomenon. Between 1949 and 1956, they starred in 16 movies, including At War with the Army, Sailor Beware, and The Stooge. The formula was simple but effective. Dean as the charming straight man, Jerry as the unpredictable childlike clown. Audiences flocked to theaters in numbers that rivaled dramatic blockbusters. In fact, their 1952 comedy Sailor Beware drew an estimated 80 million viewers, nearly half of America's population. At the same time, their reach spread across every medium. Their radio series, The Martin and Lewis Show, debuted in 1949 and drew millions of listeners weekly. By 1950, NBC brought them to television with the Colgate Comedy Hour, which became their ultimate showcase. In 35 live episodes, they shattered expectations with chaotic, often unscripted antics. Jerry would burst from under a piano in a gorilla suit, or interrupt Dean's smooth ballads by spilling trays of dishes. One infamous skit even saw Jerry parodying the romantic beach scene from Here to Eternity, scandalizing conservative viewers but cementing their reputation as bold and unpredictable. Their popularity was unlike anything the comedy world had ever seen. The duo even broke records at the Paramount Theater in New York, drawing 28,000 fans in a single day. They were adored by all audiences, Dean's crooning charmed women and older fans, while Jerry's slapstick made children and working-class audiences howl with laughter. Together, they became America's most bankable comedy team, earning up to $225,000 a week at the height of their nightclub runs. But with fame came tension. Even as they enjoyed meteoric success, cracks were beginning to show. Critics often praised Jerry's manic genius while brushing aside Dean's contribution. Interviews leaned heavily toward Lewis, reporters often ignoring Martin altogether. For Dean, the straight man, the laughter felt one-sided. What once felt like a partnership was beginning to resemble a hierarchy, and resentment quietly took root. Cracks in the partnership. By the early 1950s, Martin and Lewis were at the very top of the entertainment world. Their movies were box office smashes, their radio and TV appearances unmissable, and their nightclub performances legendary. Yet the very formula that had made them so popular was starting to turn toxic. Dean Martin, always cast as the calm, suave crooner, began to feel like little more than Jerry's setup man. Jerry, meanwhile, leaned harder into his role as the unpredictable clown, taking more control over scripts, staging, and publicity. The imbalance was obvious to insiders. During the filming of Three Ring Circus in 1954, Dean reportedly snapped in frustration, telling Jerry, "What am I around here, a fifth wheel?" In that film, Dean only got to sing 2 songs, one to a group of caged animals, another to Jerry, while Lewis carried the main role. It was a pattern repeated across their films. Critics lavished praise on Jerry's comedic genius while dismissing Dean as replaceable. One cruel remark from a reviewer said Jerry could succeed with any straight man, a comment that cut Dean deeply. Small slights added up. During promotion for Living It Up in 1954, Look magazine published a photo spread but cropped Dean out, leaving only Jerry in the frame. At a New York Times interview, a reporter spent 20 minutes talking to Jerry before even acknowledging Dean. His sarcastic outburst, "Don't mind me, I'm just the guy who sings," barely disguised the bitterness underneath. The tension grew worse on set. Crew members noticed the once inseparable pair barely spoke unless cameras were rolling. On Artists and Models in 1955, a simmering argument finally boiled over. Jerry pushed for endless retakes, and an exhausted Martin exploded, "To me, you're nothing but a $sign." For once, Jerry had no comeback. He turned away in silence, leaving witnesses stunned. By the time they began filming Hollywood or Bust in April 1956, their partnership was beyond repair. They filmed close-ups separately, edited together in post-production because they could no longer stand to share the same space. Dean, once joking and playful, now called Jerry a monkey, mocking the man who had once been his closest friend. Their final performance together came on July 25, 1956, at the Copacabana in New York. Exactly 10 years to the day after their debut, they bowed together one last time. The crowd, packed with celebrities like Frank Sinatra and Humphrey Bogart, gave them a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. But the magic was gone. Their famous banter felt forced, their smiles hiding anger and regret. When the curtain fell, so did one of Hollywood's greatest partnerships, separate paths to glory and isolation. When Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis walked away from the Copacabana stage in July 1956, it wasn't just the end of an act. It was the end of a friendship that had once seemed unbreakable. For 2 decades, they would live parallel lives, both achieving enormous success, but in very different ways and with very different costs. Dean Martin moved seamlessly into a new chapter. Just 2 years after the split, in 1958, he joined Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, and Joey Bishop as a member of the Rat Pack. Their shows at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas redefined cool. Dean, with a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other, embodied effortless charm. His music career flourished as well. In 1964, Everybody Loves Somebody knocked the Beatles off the charts, a staggering achievement in the midst of Beatlemania. Between 1964 and 1969, he released 11 top 40 albums. His acting career also soared. He starred alongside John Wayne in Rio Bravo, with Marlon Brando in The Young Lions, and headlined the Rat Pack classic Ocean's 11. Dean had become a star in his own right, no longer overshadowed by anyone. Jerry Lewis, meanwhile, poured his energy into proving himself as more than just half of a comedy duo. In 1960, he wrote, directed, and starred in The Bellboy, a film with virtually no dialogue that showed off his gift for physical comedy and inventive filmmaking. His 1963 film, The Nutty Professor, became his masterpiece, a modern retelling of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that grossed millions and cemented his reputation as a visionary director. Throughout the 1960s, Jerry made one hit after another, The Ladies' Man, The Errand Boy, The Patsy, while also hosting telethons that raised millions for muscular dystrophy research. Yet behind these triumphs lay struggles. Dean's relaxed persona masked a growing dependence on alcohol and a tendency to keep emotions locked away. Jerry, for all his success, was restless, sometimes clashing with studios over budgets and control. He worked obsessively, and the infamous unfinished project, The Day the Clown Cried in 1972, about a clown in a Nazi concentration camp, haunted him as his greatest professional regret. The two men didn't speak, didn't cross paths, and acted as though the other no longer existed. Interviewers who asked about their former partner were met with curt dismissals or awkward silences. Their feud became Hollywood legend, shorthand for friendships destroyed by fame. What neither admitted publicly was how much it still hurt. The reunion and the funeral. For 20 years after their split, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis lived in complete silence. They worked, traveled, and performed as though the other no longer existed. Then, in September 1976, fate, and Frank Sinatra, changed everything. During Jerry's annual telethon for muscular dystrophy, Sinatra made a surprise appearance, but he hadn't come alone. With millions watching live on television, Sinatra brought Dean Martin out on stage. The audience erupted, but for Dean and Jerry, it was painfully awkward. They hadn't spoken since 1956. Dressed in tuxedos, they stood frozen for a moment before Jerry forced a joke. "So, how you been?" The crowd roared, but the tension was visible. The reunion lasted just 4 minutes, but it dominated headlines the next day. Newspapers called it the reunion of the century. Donations to the telethon broke records, surpassing $32 million. Yet behind the smiles, their wounds had not healed. Dean told reporters only, "It was nice." For years after, nothing changed. They did not become friends again, nor did they meet privately. Jerry admitted in 1983, "I don't think it's in the cards. Our lifestyles are separate and apart. Still," he added softly, "but if you told me he was outside right now, it would be a joy to jump on his neck." That chance came in March 1987, under the darkest of circumstances. Dean's eldest son, Dean Paul Martin Jr., was killed in a military jet crash at just 35 years old. The loss devastated Dean, who withdrew from the world. At the funeral in Beverly Hills, Jerry arrived quietly, slipping into the back row in dark sunglasses. He hadn't seen Dean in a decade, but that day, none of it mattered. When Dean learned Jerry had been there, he was moved. He picked up the phone and called Jerry. That first conversation lasted more than an hour, filled with memories, regrets, and laughter through tears. For the first time in 30 years, they spoke like friends again. 2 years later, in 1989, the healing became public. At Bally's Hotel in Las Vegas, Dean was celebrating his 72nd birthday when Jerry appeared on stage carrying a cake. The audience gasped, then cheered as the two men embraced. Jerry, with a mix of humor and sorrow, said, "Why we broke up, I'll never know." Dean smiled and replied, "I love you, and I mean it." It was simple, sincere, and undeniable. After decades of silence, their friendship had been reborn. Love, regret, and final goodbyes. The fragile reconciliation between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis carried into their final years. Though they no longer performed together, they stayed in touch, sharing phone calls and private moments away from the spotlight. But time was not on their side. In the early 1990s, Dean's health began to deteriorate. A lifelong smoker, he suffered from lung cancer and respiratory failure. On Christmas Day in 1995, Dean Martin died at the age of 78. The entertainment world mourned, but for Jerry Lewis, the loss was deeply personal. He had not only lost a friend, but the partner who had defined his life's greatest chapter. At the funeral, Frank Sinatra gave a moving tribute, calling Dean, "My brother, not through blood, but through choice." Jerry grieved quietly, but the weight of regret never left him. In later interviews, Jerry admitted the painful truth. He had been the one to end their act. "I broke up the team," he confessed. "Dean hurt desperately, and I felt guilty of not seeing it sooner." The rivalry that once fueled headlines had been, in Jerry's words, stupid and ignorant. For 20 years, he had denied himself a friendship that meant more than he ever realized.